Alrighty, guys, welcome to the Minsanity podcast. Our guest today is not only a rising star in the field of mineralogy, he's an all-around nice guy, and it's a privilege to interview my friend who's been involved in mineral collecting since almost as early as I was in my life. He grew up in suburban New York, outside New York City on Long Island. He got his undergraduate degree from SUNY Oswego, followed by a master's in mineralogy from Miami University in Ohio, and he's currently wrapping up his PhD in geology at the University of Michigan. Chris Emproto, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Phil. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So you and I have a number of things in common, but one of them is that we both grew up on Long Island, and I think that was a little formative to our interest in minerals as a kid. Tell me a little bit about some of your first memories growing up on Long Island and being exposed to minerals.
So, yeah, I don't know where my love of earth science came from. I think it may just have been in my genes deep down somewhere. I don't really have any scientists in my family, but I was really lucky. I had a lot of people in my family that were supportive of my scientific interests, and
Cool.
everything I was interested in learning about, they would buy me like books to learn more, or if I wanted to go to mineral museums. So I grew up going to the Hicksville Gregory Museum.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yep, me too.
Excellent mineral collection.
Totally.
For such a small space.
Yeah, it's really random. I remember there's the big mall there, right? And then there's the museum. And I remember going with my mom and being like, wow, this is like a legit mineral museum.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of mineral people too, and I've mentioned that, and I feel like not very many people have heard of it. So I want to give a shout out to that museum because it's pretty solid.
Does it still exist? Do you know?
Yeah, I think so.
Cool.
I was just there maybe 3 years ago.
Oh wow, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
So yeah, it's still around to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah, awesome.
But also Natural History Museum was right there, and so it was for years I had wanted to go to this, and we were sort of building up to it.
Yep.
And I remember going and seeing the mineral collection, and I was also really into fossils at the time. It's still a passing interest of mine, and
me too.
just had the absolute best day ever as an 8-year-old kid seeing that mineral collection.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, the American Museum is truly it's like Aladdin's cave. I remember as a kid just being blown away, this giant topaz, you can touch it, and all these famous specimens.
It's
cool.
Yeah, totally, again, mind-blowing, because you're used to seeing things in books.
Exactly.
And it's all that size when it's printed on the page, and you see a topaz crystal that's
cool.
larger than you are.
So did you get involved in any of the clubs then as a kid, or it was mostly going to museums? And
I didn't even know those clubs existed
until
it was really when I was an undergraduate, and I finally met other mineral collectors.
Yeah.
That were my age.
Yeah.
I did have one or two mentors in the collecting world when I was growing up. So Joe Freilich was a mentor of mine.
Joe Freilich, and he was a major collector. Obviously, was one of the first people to have his collection featured in a special issue of the Mineralogical Record, and the auction was very prominent. So
actually, I had him sign a mineralogical record for me. I made him feel like a superstar. He really liked me and took me under his wing, and
that's really cool.
Yeah, gave me some screaming deals on things, and it's taught me a lot about what to look for in a mineral specimen. Helped me actually refine a taste, because when I first got there, a lot of people just want to get as many different rocks as possible. So you look at the box, you find the one with the lowest price tag, and you get it so that you have an example of that. Totally. And he was the one who kind of broke me of that, and was like, look at the specimen. Look for damage, look at the quality.
Consider quality. That's really cool to have a mentor at a young age that can kind of impart that on you as a collector.
Yeah, it was
cool.
Totally revamped my collection in a really short period of time, from just things from a museum gift shop where I'd buy gypsum roses that bounced around in the box with 100 other gypsum roses.
So when did you first kind of have the idea that geoscience, geology was something you might want to pursue in college?
I had to really narrow things down at first. I wanted to be a vet when I was younger because I really loved animals. And then the thought of doing surgery on a puppy or a kitten or something, even though it's totally for their own health and whatever, I was I can't do this. I'm going to cut things in half that won't scream. I'm going to study rocks.
Inanimate objects.
But I also wanted to do fossils as well when I was younger. But then the thing that just really stuck around, that my interest intensified in rather than faded away, were minerals.
Cool.
Especially going to visit Joe Freilich and the Hicksville Gregory Museum as
Yeah.
well. They have really nice fossils at the Gregory Museum, but I just over the years found myself drawn more and more to minerals.
Yeah, cool.
And then when it came time to think about what I wanted to study for college for my undergraduate degree, Joe recommended the Colorado School of Mines, which I'd never heard of, and like a couple of other places. And we looked in there. I ended up visiting, and it just didn't really work out in terms of the costs for tuition and all that.
Well, it's also like a very, I can tell you from my own experience,
Yeah.
very engineering intense, you know, and I won't go into all this, but I had an interesting experience of flunking out the first time and getting a master's degree the second time, largely because the engineering curriculum was not for me. So I think going to a more general geology program for your undergrad has a lot of upside.
Yeah, and I ended up going to state school, like SUNY Oswego, and I got a great education there.
Yeah.
It was in a beautiful part of New York. I met a lot of other people my own age that had that same interest again for the first time.
Yeah.
You know, there weren't that many other serious mineral collectors, but I have this kind of effect on people that I'm around where I turn them into mineral collectors. Mostly by just being like, here, take these rocks. And
Osmosis,
like, okay,
osmosis and excitement.
So I feel like I was a bit of sort of like proselytizing
Yeah,
people
cool.
being mineral collectors.
So what was that like at Oswego? You were in the geology program, and then you guys had some field opportunities, collecting opportunities, and I mean, obviously, upstate New York is famous for minerals, Herkimer diamonds, and the Adirondacks, and all different stuff.
Yeah, so you know the collecting on Long Island is pretty slim, and so
it's a glacial pile of sand.
And Oswego doesn't have the best bedrock geology for minerals. There's nothing really in that area, but it's really close. Well, 2.5 hours is close to me in terms of like driving, because it's 2.5 hours from home to Franklin, New Jersey to collect. So whenever I think I'm going collecting, I think 2.5 hour drive. So like 2.5 hours to the Adirondack lowlands. So I love going Powers Farm, Selleck Road, Rose Road. St. Lawrence County.
Cool.
I love minerals from there. And then 2 hours down to the Herkimer mines, which I collect rare minerals, but I have a soft spot for New York minerals, and I have a number of Herkimer diamonds in my collection because I just think they're really cool.
Yeah, well, and you were able to connect with some kind of well-known people in the New York mineral collecting scene, right? Like Steve Chamberlain.
Yeah, Steve Chamberlain was my next most important mentor.
Cool.
There.
Yeah.
I had read so many of his articles just because I was interested in New York minerals, and I hadn't really connected with the broader mineral scene by this point. It was really just people in my program that I knew.
Okay.
But I just sent Steve an email one day, and he was like, hey, you should come over. And I left with like 3 banker boxes of rocks. After spending like 5 hours just talking to him and hearing all his stories and seeing some incredible New York minerals.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of Mr. New York mineralogy. One of the founders of the Rochester Symposium and major contributor to the State Museum in Albany. So then from SUNY, you ended up going over to Miami in Ohio. Tell me a little bit about that process and how you chose Miami and what your thoughts were as far as grad school.
Yeah. So I knew I wanted to go to graduate school. And I wanted to go for a PhD since actually the very first geology class that I took. The first time I sat in a chair in a geology class, and that introductory lecture, again, I'd already had an intense interest in rocks and minerals and geologic history, but I'd never met someone that had a PhD in geology that was like an expert. And it was like, I don't want to say intoxicating, but it was just like I couldn't take my eyes off the projector. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm learning geology right now in like a college class.
Exactly. Like this is a whole new world that it's interesting because as a collector, right, most of us are largely self-taught. And then we understand geoscience as a profession sort of in an abstract way, but I think I had a similar experience when I really got into the technical side of it. I'm like, wow, this is a whole other world. You know, and I didn't even know this existed, or like this was a career option.
Learning from like a book that's entry level too is so different from someone teaching you and getting you to that next level.
Completely.
And that was the part that was like addicting for me. I was like, wow, I'm learning things right. And it was just the intro lecture, of course, but I was like so excited for the rest of the
that's the
degree.
Spark. And it sounds like you saw in that moment the opportunities for you getting to the educational point or the career point where the instructor was.
Yes,
you know, like
exactly.
That's a cool feeling too.
Yeah.
Of like, wow, like I can do that. That could be a career path for me.
Yeah, exactly. And that professor that taught that lecture ended up being my mineralogy professor.
Oh, wow.
And he was also my undergraduate advisor.
Okay.
And even past when he had kind of stepped down from that role, he kind of still served as a mentor for me for like my undergraduate research project, which wasn't technically required, but I'm a nerd, cool. So I wanted to do undergraduate
so what
research.
What did you do for your undergraduate research project?
So I mentioned the Rose Road locality in New York. Mm-hmm. It's a really interesting skarn type locality.
Okay.
And it has a wollastonite bearing area where it's like mostly albite skarn, but then there's like a big calcite vein with what I think are world-class wollastonite crystals in there. Wow. Most of them are partially pseudomorphed by like green diopside or whatever. They're really interesting looking, like morphologic crystals of wollastonite that rare. There's some that are like 30 centimeters in there. Cool. Okay. Yeah, so I was just totally enamored by that locality from the first time I visited there, and I was like, I want to know what's going on here. I didn't really even know what a skarn was at that point. I was just like, these are really cool rocks. Yeah. But the thing that's really interesting about there is just like maybe 300 feet away in the woods, there's a purple diopside skarn.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which is mineralogically very unusual. There are some similar-ish localities. I think there's one on Baffin Island in Canada.
Okay.
But really unusual. Maybe only a handful of those localities in the world where you have purple diopside as a major mineral. It's purple.
Yeah.
It's
that's quite distinct.
Really purple.
Yeah. Wow.
And I was like, why are these so different right next to each other?
Interesting. Wow. So you sort of try to decode some of that.
Yeah. I don't know how much actual scientific progress I made, but I looked at a lot of rocks. I learned a lot about the process of like researching. Like I would see something, like, okay, I'm going to research this mineral assemblage.
Well, and that's half of it, right? Understanding the pedagogical approach, the scientific method, and I think you and I are alike in that we've been able to design a lot of our own research projects and have supportive advisors that let us design our own projects, which is not always how it works in science. So
yeah, I've been extremely privileged that way, that I've been able to do that 3 times now in all of my different programs. Yeah. So I completely designed that undergraduate research project. Yeah. We didn't have funding or anything.
Sure,
So I'm not beholden to anyone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah, we were really lucky. We had an SEM and an XRD.
I was about to ask, so that was your first introduction then to analytical methods?
Yes. Cool. Very lucky.
Yeah, and that's great being at a school that had those instruments where you can do that.
Yeah, it's definitely not something that every small state school has.
No.
And they had a lot of kind of funny rules. Now that I've used the SEM a lot, you're like, don't touch this knob, you know? But it's like, you can touch it, you just have to like recalibrate things later.
Yeah,
like
you have to know what you're doing.
Yeah, but they're they had all these general users. So
don't ever touch that.
Yeah,
that's funny. Now you know why.
Yeah. But it was great learning.
So what led you to Miami then? How did you end up at Miami after that?
That same professor knew John.
Okay.
And he knew that I'm like a huge mineral collector. I just have this lifelong interest. And he knew it was someone that I would really get along with and I would benefit from having as a mentor. And he had connected me with John. But funny enough, so I sent John an email in, I believe it was October. John could corroborate because this was a very specific event for him. He got into a mountain biking accident the day I think after I emailed him.
Oh wow. Oh no.
And so I was waiting like a few weeks for a response, and he finally like typed me a response. He's like, I'm so sorry, I got into a mountain biking accident on like October whatever. Like broke both of my arms. Emails are very painful.
Oh, no.
Like reach out to me later and we can talk. And I really hadn't thought too deeply about other graduate programs. There are no graduate students in geology at Oswego. They don't have a graduate program.
Okay.
So I'd never met a geology graduate student at that point.
Sure, you didn't understand what the process was.
Didn't understand what the process was. I thought it was like undergrad where you just kind of throw your hat in. And, and so I applied to schools where I didn't even hear back from the advisor I wanted to work with. Which is like, of course, like the dumb thing to do, complete waste of money.
Well, you're putting feelers out. I mean, you didn't have the necessarily the guidance of somebody saying, this is the process for this school. And like, I did a bit of the same. You just kind of put feelers out and,
well, you can send as many emails as you want. Those are free.
Yeah,
it's another thing to like fill out the application, pay the application fee when like they didn't even respond to your email. So I just had no idea what I was doing.
Sure. Okay.
But I I was thinking I was going to graduate with not knowing what I was going to do next.
Okay.
Because I had applied to Miami. John was like, you should still apply. I'm not really sure what the funding situation will be like. It's also, I'm just kind of in a tough place right now dealing with this injury. Yeah.
Okay.
But he said, you should definitely just put your application in and I'll see what I can do. And so I was about to graduate. I was maybe like 3 days from graduating. And I had no idea what I was going to do next. I was like, I'm just going to chill and go dig rocks, I guess.
What happens.
Yeah. 22-year-olds aren't very smart. So I was like, all right, this is kind of scary. And then I had also applied for this mining job, a summer job, like months before. And I got a call like 3 days before graduation. They're like, hey, you want to come work for us in Wyoming for the summer? I was like, oh, finally, all right, I got something. Like, there's a next step. And then 2 days after that, John Rackervan called me.
Okay.
And he said, there's an extra teaching assistantship in the department, and it's my turn to be able to like take that if I want to. Do you want to come and start graduate school with me? And I, of course, said yes. Like, I would love to. He first like vetted me a little bit, just asked me about my interests, because we hadn't actually formally talked on the phone or interviewed or anything. He just kind of took a chance after my undergraduate mentor, Paul Tomaschek,
had reached out.
Yeah.
Cool. Wow,
So
that's great.
That's how I got to Miami.
Awesome.
Just
okay.
by fluke.
Yeah. So when you and I met, I believe it was when I came to Cincinnati to do the talk for the Christmas meeting of the Cincinnati Club, and I knew John a little bit at that point, but it was really a highlight of the trip getting to meet you and Daniel and a couple other students from Miami, and I really got the impression that it was kind of like a chicken or the egg thing. Like, did John attract the mineral collectors, or did the mineral collectors attract John? But I thought it was really cool how you guys had like that synergy of a small group within, a big tier 1 research school that, were really passionate about minerals. Like, tell me a little bit about that experience. And
So that's an interesting thought, the chicken or the egg. I think it's just that mineral collecting is really important to John. It's part of his science as well, and that is something that's really interesting for other people that also share that that same passion. So there are a lot of people that are very much interested in the science, but it's not part of like a personal hobby of theirs, and that's completely fine.
Sure, yeah, I mean, that was my experience in grad school.
Yeah.
That was most of my peers and my advisor.
But we're very lucky in mineralogy that you can physically hold a piece of the science.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of people that at least have like a passing interest in that. And with John, it's like, again, such a big part of his work that if that is one of your interests, you're going to say, I want to work with that person.
Cool.
Like, we have that same passion. And there would be so many times that I'd show up to work and I'd be in the office and John would come by and he's like, hey man, you got to see this rock, and pull out a rock. And there'd be other times I'm like, hey John, you got to see what just came in the mail. And I like go to his office and we like look at rocks and talk about things. And so I think it's just more of like you click when you have that same sort of shared interest. And again, we make it part of the science. And I was really lucky there. I got to design my own project.
Okay.
It was after a couple of things didn't really work out. Okay. And so when John had accepted me, it was with the caveat that I wouldn't really be able to start doing things until at least my second year. Okay. Just because he was, again, like really struggling with like recovery. Sure. And he was also planning on graduating, I believe, 3 graduate students that year.
When you probably had coursework too, initially.
Yeah. So I ended up being at Miami for 3 years.
Yeah, that was my experience with my master's as well. And looking back on it, I think maybe it was a blessing in disguise. When I think of you, and I think other people in the mineral community think of you, I think of a bunch of things, but one of them is that you're an analytical whiz kid, especially on SEM, EDX, and XRD instruments. Was Miami part of that? I know it sounds like you did a little bit of that at Oswego, but at Miami, were you able to kind of get deeper into instrumentation?
Yeah, absolutely. So of course, I'm still very much learning on the bottom part of the learning curve, because interpreting the analytical data is a lot more complicated than it might sound. But I got so much hands-on experience at Miami, so I was really lucky again that it was free to use those instruments for students.
Yeah, that's really nice.
Yeah, it's not like, it's free in terms of like a grant pays for it. Like, was totally free for
like
my
strings.
advisor. Yeah.
That's great.
So I booked so much instrument time. I would go in on the weekends and just analyze random things from my collection, things I was interested. I mean, I looked at like a piece of leather for my shoe. We looked at parking lot dirt. I just looked at so many things. I was just really curious.
Yeah, well, you're driven by the intellectual curiosity, and also, I mean, with anything, right? You know, driving a car, operating XRD, experience, makes perfection. So I'm sure all that experience was huge, and just getting really comfortable with interpreting data, with running the instrument, with setting up parameters, like.
Yeah, exactly. Putting an unknown in there, something you're like, I don't know what this could be. It just trains you, because if you are just looking at the same stuff all the time, or you think you know the answer, and you put it in, you're just looking for one thing. Like, that's one set of analytical experience, but to really have like versatile skill sets, you just have to look at lots and lots of different things. Because like I said, interpreting the data can be really tough. So for example, with XEDS, you have a spectrum, and you got like different amounts of X-ray counts at different energies, and that's like your x-axis of the chart. And there are some things that overlap like completely. And programs are sometimes good at picking that out, sometimes not. So like for example, sodium and zinc overlap. So you might think like, oh, this is really weird. This is a sodium sulfide or whatever. No, it's sphalerite or wurtzite. You just gotta.
Well, I saw this in grad school too. I was working in the mineralogy lab as an RA for a couple semesters, and I would work with students, and they just look at it as a black box, right?
Yeah.
And you put something in, it's like garbage in, garbage out, right? If you don't understand your sample and you haven't characterized it, data doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you really got from an early point, like, you have to be able to interpret data, but you also have to actually understand your sample in a contextual sense.
Yeah, and I mean, I've made like analytical mistakes too. People have corrected me on MinDat over things where I look back and it's like, that was pretty obvious, but you get better, and then I don't make that mistake again. But minerals are very diverse, so I'm sure, I'll encounter lots and lots of things in the future that'll make me scratch my head and keep learning. So
tell me a little bit about your master's project at Miami, what you ended up doing with John.
Yeah, so as a lot of people know, and you certainly know, John loves apatite.
Yeah.
And I was very interested in sort of like the geology of like the Adirondack Mountains in northern Canada, like the Grenville province. And it's known for a lot of ugly minerals, which is fair, but they're really cool. They look kind of ancient and wise, I would say, just like huge crystals of rock-forming minerals. Totally. They're just cool, I don't know. And I'd really liked a lot of those localities. I'd gone to visit a few that they all seemed to have apatite. It seemed to be like a common sort of thing. And all these crustal carbonatite, like the vein dikes, as they're called. I just noticed like they all have apatite, and I'd learned from John, apatite can tell you a lot about how a rock formed. And it just didn't seem like people had done very much research this century on these occurrences. Because you look at a lot of the papers from when people were studying these, they're from like 1906.
Oh yeah. No, that was my master's. All my references were from the early 20th century.
Like this, that was like 70 years before they like came to the
our
conclusion
understanding
of
of science is totally different now. Yeah.
So I was just really interested in how these form. Like, why do you have feldspar crystals that are like three? It sounds like a fish story, but I swear I saw like there's some big ones.
Got away. Yeah.
But there are huge crystals in there, and I was like, how can this possibly form?
No.
And I brought up the project idea to John, and we'd actually X-rayed a very interesting apatite in terms of the chemistry of it. And I think that was kind of the little thing that got John to say, oh, all right, maybe we'll keep on this. It seemed like something I was really interested in. It was my second year, and so I needed to get going with something by that point. We tried another project, and it just didn't really click with me. But this one I was just really interested in. It seemed like something no one had done before. We had a lot of contacts, like Dave Joyce, Ray McDougall. We contacts at the
people to show you all these localities. And that's huge. Well, and that's really nice being able to do a technical mineralogy project that has a field component, because as you know, so many people now in the field of mineralogy, with how technical it's become, there's no field work. So I'm sure for you as a collector, like that was huge, being able to do field work and then go back to the lab and do analytical stuff. Yeah,
if you want to know how minerals formed, you have to go and see where they are. Like the context is so important. And it really helped me make sense of these things. So really, really important to get to go into the field, see the context of things, understand, okay, these are these primary textures from when this was a molten carbonate magma. and things just started to click.
Yeah.
And we found some like pretty interesting results in terms of thinking about how these rocks form. So that, just for a little bit of the context, the crustal carbonatites, they're named because they form from melting of the crust, whereas like the other famous carbonatites are from the partial melting of like pieces of the mantle or lower crust. Yeah. But these are like, if you melt a limestone, you get a carbonate magma.
Yeah, okay, wow.
Yeah. And carbonate is like pretty, it doesn't link together like silicate does. So it's really explosive.
Immiscible behavior and volatile,
So you get a really explosive eruption if it's like really sticky and it builds up pressure.
I see.
But these are, it's like hot maple syrup.
Interesting, wow.
And it just like shoots its way up like, fracture zones of weakness or whatever. And carbonate, especially these that have a lot of fluorine and other things that are really good at taking apart silicate rocks.
Yeah.
And they take them apart and basically chew them up and spit them right back out. And so you get that rapid, like taking apart and spitting back out along the margins of where it's in contact with the rock, and so that's how you grow massive crystals.
Okay,
things can zoom around in that melt because there's no like linkage, there's no chains.
Well, and that's like so counter to, I feel like, people's instinctual view of how this happens, right?
Yeah.
Like slow, deliberate assembly and mechanics, and it's actually like a very chaotic environment, which is how cool to study that process.
Like, who knows how fast? I mean, weeks to months, maybe.
Yeah.
Who knows? It's not thousands or hundreds of thousands of years.
No, and that's cutting edge.
Fast.
That kind of thermodynamics, rheology, that's totally cutting edge. Wow, cool. So you did the field work, then you came back to the lab, worked with John.
Yeah.
And skipping ahead a little bit, how did that sort of lead you to UMich and to your PhD that you're kind of in the final stages of now, once you wrapped up at Miami?
Yeah. So after I had a lot more experience in graduate school, again, I didn't know a geology graduate student until I became one.
Yep.
And so having spent a lot more time around, especially like PhD students, I kind of learned what I wanted and didn't want out of an advisor.
Okay.
And I was graduating I didn't know it yet, I was graduating into COVID.
Oh, yeah.
And so I had sent out all my applications. I did a lot of research. I found professors I thought I would be able to learn different things from, I would get like complementary sorts of training, and I wanted to turn a little bit more towards like critical mineral deposits.
Yeah, okay.
Just kind of understand how can I use my skills with understanding how minerals form to better understand how deposits of elements that we need for
putting it in a societal context, right? I mean, I think about this a lot too. That's what led me in grad school to be really interested in rare earths. Part of it was the geochemical fascination, the mineralogy part. But I think having the broader societal view is, that's cool.
Yeah, so I was interested in things like copper, lithium, rare earths, and I found this professor at the University of Michigan. He's very interested in energy, the transition to sustainable forms of energy, and he's an economic geologist, Adam Simon is his name. I just sent an email out to him, and he seemed pretty interested in my skill set. And we interviewed. Cool. He seemed really focused on the next step. Like he always asks, where do you want to be, and then that's his focus is like getting you there.
Get you there, yeah. Wow.
Yeah. I know other people may have different experiences in the PhD realm where they tend to hold on to you for as long as they can.
Sure. Well, I mean, it sounds like he really cares about his students getting into the job market, getting into their career, and like succeeding, which is great.
Yeah. So I just thought this would be an excellent next step. I'll learn how to apply the skills that I already have to a problem I'm interested in. And I applied, and unfortunately COVID happened, so I didn't get to visit. I got to visit New Mexico Tech, where I had also applied, which is another one of my top choices. But ended up just committing to Michigan because it just seemed like that I got along really well with the advisor. The project that he had pitched initially, I'll admit, he probably won't watch this, but I'll admit I was a little bit skeptical of it. It seemed something that was, I guess, interesting in that we didn't really know much about it. It's titanium isotope fractionation. So for many years, people looked at titanium isotopes and they're like, these are really boring. This falls in a really narrow range. There's nothing going on.
There isn't a lot of scientific nuance necessarily within this isotope data.
Because you need really high precision instruments to measure those changes because they're so minor. So people were like, this is boring. Let's move on.
Yeah, end of story.
Yeah. But mineral deposits are really different. Also, titanium is like a really stubborn sort of thing moving around. People are like, oh, it doesn't go anywhere.
It's not mobile.
It's not mobile.
Yeah.
But like when you have a big mineral deposit that forms from moving a lot of metal around in one place, like, hey, it turns out you can move some titanium around.
And maybe it tells something.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was sort of an initial project idea then.
Yeah, and we ended up exploring that, and I got more interested in it because, again, I'm just interested in like how minerals form, why we have the minerals that we have, like how does all of this Earth symphony come together?
Yeah, totally.
And just understanding why we have what we have. Why can we put a beautiful rock on this table?
Exactly.
There's no reason that had to be beautiful. But
No, but there's a process, and then a lot of that process we're very much still understanding the details of that.
Yeah.
So after the titanium thing, what did you sort of land on next, or?
So I did end up working on a titanium thing. We had a lot of ups and downs, some really encouraging successes and some discouraging failures. Mm-hmm. But getting through that, that's going to be a part of my dissertation. But another thing I landed on was lithium. I really wanted to kind of do a broader PhD. I didn't want to just focus on one really specific thing. And I ended up getting an internship with a lithium company. It's Lithium Americas. They are constructing the Thacker Pass mine. Oh, wow. Yeah, it's been in the news a lot lately. Yeah.
Great.
So I just thought that seemed really interesting. Again, I was a little bit skeptical in the beginning because it was clays, but the more I started doing research on them, what they lack in physical aesthetics and beauty.
Not the most collectible specimens.
Yeah, I do have a clay mineral collection. If there's anyone's going to have one, it's going to be me.
Well, John Rackman and I were talking about phyllosilicate, later silicate crystal chemistry the other day, and so you're not the only one.
Yeah. So anyway, what these clays lack in physical beauty, they more than make up for with the intrigue. The crystal structures are really fascinating in terms of just how flexible they can be with soaking up environmental pollutants or other. I mean, you use that to soak up the smell of cat urine in litter boxes. That's clay minerals. Yeah. So they have a lot of interesting properties, and that also leads to the formation of some of these interesting mineral deposits.
Yeah, we look at these ion exchange, the processes they have now, like the rare earth clays in China. This is hugely important. So cool. So you're working with the rare earth company a little bit, and then it sounds like you're also incorporating this into part of your dissertation.
Yeah, this is going to be a dissertation chapter, just trying to understand how that massive lithium deposit formed.
Okay.
Because a lake should not be able to spit out that much lithium-rich clay.
Yeah, the degree of enrichment is pretty serious.
Yeah,
right?
it's insane.
Yeah, wow.
It's actually, unique in terms of just how rich in lithium it is. And so I was really curious, like, how did this form? Because it's a mineralogically controlled process there, and that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, so do some phase characterization.
Yeah, a lot of X-ray diffraction to characterize the clay.
Probably tiny little grains, I imagine.
Yeah.
Very small.
Yeah, and everyone was so skeptical too at some of the analyses I want to do, like laser ablation, like, okay, you're going to blast this 10 micron spot with a laser, you're probably going to hit all sorts of other stuff. It's or I can try this and get an imperfect answer, or I can just not do anything and not know anything.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You don't know it doesn't work until you fail 10,000 times, and then the one that succeeds, you figure it out. So
and it turns out that it did work. So
we'll
be publishing that hopefully next year.
Oh, fantastic.
But it's been a really interesting journey. I'm going to be graduating in April.
Cool.
Of 2024. So
that's great. And you were just in South Africa doing some research. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I'm very blessed to be able to go to South Africa twice this summer.
Oh, wow.
The first time was a department field trip to the University of Michigan, which, again, really fortunate to be able to go on. We have the resources to run these international field trips. But it was partially led by a professor emeritus. He lives in New Mexico. His name is John Geisman.
Okay.
He is a paleomagnetic expert, tectonics person, studies the Permo-Triassic boundary. And within the Karoo Basin that covers much of South Africa, they preserve a lot of excellent terrestrial Permian and Triassic rocks.
Oh, interesting.
And so it's been really intensely studied to try to understand the timing of this. Was it a gradual faunal turnover, or was it really apocalyptic event, the KT extinction?
Yeah, exactly. Interesting.
Yeah, and it's of societal relevance because it's believed that regardless of if it was gradual or sudden, that it was caused by climate change.
Yeah, like the Siberian traps, these basically coal power plants on steroids, right?
Yeah.
It's been in the media a bit, and it's a scary thought. And
yeah,
that research is very relevant.
Exactly. Yeah, we want to know what we're in for. How do ecosystems respond and recover? This isn't directly like my personal research there, but it's something, again, I'm just very generally interested in geology.
I mean, you and I are alike in that if you give us a rabbit hole, we'll go down it. And it's a blessing and a curse, I think, sometimes, but that curiosity is really important.
So following the field trip, I was invited to come back to South Africa in August. The field trip was in May.
Okay.
I was invited to come back in August to help with the field work because someone that was supposed to be going ended up having some health issues, and they didn't want to be a person down. Just field work, I mean, you know what it's like.
Yeah, you're in another country.
Yeah. So I was so lucky to be invited, got to go for 2 weeks, learned so much from people that had very different skill sets, very different ways of approaching problems.
Yeah.
But it was really fun. We found some very, very cool fossils.
Yeah.
And, it's illegal to collect vertebrate fossils there if you're not like a paleontologist.
Sure.
So it's just really cool seeing a riverbed full of bones.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're like 250 million years old.
Yeah, that's amazing. So very cool.
Yeah, it's once in a lifetime sort of experience.
Yeah. So where do you see yourself in 5 years?
I would really like to be in a research position somewhere. I love crystallography, crystal chemistry.
Would you consider museum, university? Are you up to different options, or research? It sounds like is the focus.
As long as I'm able to keep doing research and keep answering questions I'm really curious about, then I'm pretty open. I've waxed and waned on being a professor in the past. There are some times where I'm like, wow, being a professor seems really nice, and you get to like mentor all these students and connect with students that like share your passion.
Yeah.
And you get to design classes and teach people the things that inspire you.
Yeah.
And also like flexible schedules, lots of conferences, like the collegiate atmosphere I really like.
Yeah. But
then there are also plenty of downsides, of course, to that life. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
The administration can be challenging in some universities.
Of course.
So I've waxed and waned on whether or not that's for me. It's not something I would totally turn away or say isn't going to happen. Yeah. But to me, I'm just really a curious person, and I want to keep being able to do research. Yeah. So working at a national lab or at a museum, especially, just being surrounded by rocks.
Getting to work with minerals.
Yeah, very much its own reward.
Cool. So kind of as a closing question, you're somebody that I think has achieved a really high degree, not only of mineral connoisseurship, but of sophistication and appreciation of minerals in a broad sense of what mineralogy is. I think a lot of young collectors look up to you and what you've done as far as not building a collection and your knowledge. What are a few tips that maybe you have for younger collectors, people thinking about getting into geoscience who might be watching this, who want to build a great mineral collection but don't have a lot of money, who want to get into geoscience but maybe don't even know what that means? What are just a few little takeaways maybe that?
Yeah, I think it can be really easy to get lost in terms of your collecting parameters, because now you can go on Mindat and see every rock that's ever been picked up. And it can be really easy to just kind of become disillusioned with your own collection. Like, okay, I need to get the best specimen of this. But really, like, I collect minerals because I'm really interested in them. I see a lot of internal beauty. That's why I'm known as like a crust collector, chunk collector, whatnot.
I'm really proudly.
I'm just really fascinated with the minerals themselves, and I try not to get lost in that. And I buy rocks that I really want because it's something that gets me excited. Yeah. And you don't need to spend a lot of money. I mean, I bought a $12 rock yesterday, and I bought a $350 rock yesterday.
And you were psyched on both.
Yeah. So, cool. With the not having a lot of money, it's just like stay true to what you're interested in, follow your interests, and continue to be curious. That's what led me down the path that I'm on, is that I was just always curious, wanted to learn more, and kept doing that, and been very lucky that doors have opened. I've been able to answer questions that I've had that you can't find an answer to in a book. Yeah, cool. And that's really what it's about for me, just like staying true to that curiosity. And you can build a world-class collection by just following what you're passionate about. And
Yeah.
is it world class for every mineral category?
Sure.
No, that's impossible.
No, but that's a subjective term.
Yeah.
You know, if it's satisfying, if it's meaningful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you can build a collection of rocks that you're like, this is awesome. I get excited every time I open these boxes and look at things.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's be patient and get things that excite you and stay true to that first and foremost. You know, you don't need to recycle your collection because it can't compete with a DeSautel's case.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
They're rocks. They don't have to be pretty.
Exactly.
We're lucky they look like anything.
You're right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's very wise. Well, Chris, thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Bill.